This presentation introduces the CIMA Integrated Case Studies and gives some suggestions about how you should approach them. For the purpose of this presentation, we model it on an operational level case study, simply because when we talk a little bit or refer a little bit to technical materials, you will understand that, whatever level of case study you are attempting, but the advice will work for all three levels. First of all, an overview of the case study. You know that at each level, after you pass the 3 objective test exams, then there is an integrated case study. Essentially, this is in the nature of a written examination. You could be asked to give explanations, recommendations, some sort of analysis. Your role is as an employee in the organization, and you must produce a realistic work type reply, typically an email, perhaps a memorandum, a briefing paper, perhaps even a letter, usually to your superior. You will type your answer in to a word processing like a page on the computer. So in other words, it is not multiple choice, it is no ticking of boxes, it is essentially writing a type of essay, albeit dressed up as an email, a letter, a memorandum, writing this letter to your boss. Calculations will never be required. Partly this is because it is very difficult to set out calculations using a word processing type format, but also of course calculations can be very adequately checked anyway using the multiple choice or objective test type of examinations that you will already have performed. Calculations, or very simple calculations, you may find useful, perhaps working out a gross profit percentage, something of that sort, but you'll never be asked or required specifically to produce calculations. You are very likely to have to interpret calculations or results or budgets which have already been performed, perhaps to interpret them, perhaps to set out limitations of these calculations, or to suggest other information that might be useful. Some weeks before your exam, you will be given by CIMA pre-seen material. Typically this is around 20 to 25 pages of information, so it's really quite substantial. The purpose of this is to allow you to immerse yourself and become as though you were an employee of the company with quite a lot of background knowledge relating to the organization that is being presented in the examination. So typically it will have maybe recent financial results, maybe an organization chart, details of the ownership structure of the organization, the activities the organization carries out, perhaps some of the management accounts that are relevant to the organization, information about the market, competitors, events happening in the environment, and so on. So you're given this really full background. When the exam comes along, you will then be given 3 to 5 sections, like questions, that you are required to answer. These usually give you relatively small amounts of additional information. Often you will have to use this additional information in conjunction with what you have already seen in the pre-seen material, but occasionally the additional information is almost standalone. And we're emphasizing during this presentation that the additional questions in the pre-seen material can make it very difficult for you to have any sort of prediction about what you might actually be asked in the examination. Each of these 3 to 5 sections can have 1 or 2 tasks within it. So one task might be to write an email to your boss explaining something. Task 2 might be writing a briefing paper to your team, something of that sort. And if there are several tasks, they will have approximately equal marks given to them. Each section has a time limit. You'll be given information about what the time limits are and how many sections there are at the start of the exam. And you are shown one section at a time. And then you are compulsorily moved on to the next section after the time is up. Once you've moved on to that section, you cannot move back. So essentially the case study evolves through time. It's as though in the morning you had to do an email, then after 11 o'clock maybe you have to do some sort of report, then after lunch you had to do maybe a briefing paper and so on, and there is no going back, there is no changing what you did earlier, there's no even seeing what you wrote earlier. So it's strictly moving forward from section 1 to section 2 to section 3 to section 4 and so on. If you finish section 1 early, you can elect to move on early, but if you moved on 10 minutes early, this 10 minutes is wasted. It is not added, if you like, to what might be available to section 2 or 3. So there is no advantage whatsoever of electing to move on from section 1 to section 2, from section 2 to section 3, before you are forced to move on. You're just sacrificing time for no benefit whatsoever. The Preseen material is a new set for each examination sitting, and from that there for each exam are 5 variants. This allows CIMA to set exams in multiple time zones at the same time, so that people, if you like, in the Far East, whose 9 o'clock occurs earlier in the mornings, or before that, maybe in people around Europe and so on, you can come out and email your friends with what was in the exam. So there are 5 variants. Each of these variants has maybe 4 separate tasks within it. Each variant, therefore, with its 4 tasks, there's going to be about 20 tasks available in total coming from that one set of Preseen material. Basically, you have no hope of predicting what sort of questions might come up. Here, for example, is basically the variance from August 2016. This was a Preseen based on, or a case study based on Wise Choice Hotels. So here we have the 5 variants across the top of the screen. There's a rough theme here. Variant 1 was the acquisition of a chain of 3 hotels. Variant 2, improving performance, a bit about IT in it and so on. Variant 3 was construction of a new hotel and all the problems that might be associated with that, and so on. And then what we have under that are the very brief synopsis of what was in each section of each variant. And then going down the side of the page, we have a list of the sections for each variant. And you see here there is an absolutely huge variety of topics or subjects covered in the case study. So just going down, just to emphasize this great variety here. So modified audit reports were covered, in the meaning or interpretation of a modified audit report, question on relevant costs, induction programs for staff, cost of quality, interpretation of budgets and variances, impact of an acquisition on the group or consolidated financial statements, a briefing paper setting out certain explanations about pricing and zero-based budgeting, activity-based costing, benefits that may come from a new IT system, economic order quantities, accounting for IT costs, whether maybe they should be capitalized or written off, interpretation and use of expected values, IT changeover methods, advantages, disadvantages, and so on. the pricing and the marketing mix. Should certain costs be capitalized or should they be written off? Quantity, price and mix variances. A bit of working capital, assessing the creditworthiness of customers. How can we get or make use perhaps of a flexible workforce? Cost and profit centers, reward systems, marketing mix for services, explaining planning and operational variances, accounting for the disposal of property, goodwill, its nature, where it arises, how it will be displayed in the financial statements, interpretation of payoff tables, cash flow, working capital, corporate social responsibility, impact on the financial statements of government grants and the effect of first-year allowances, outsourcing of certain procedures or parts of the organisation, and decision trees. So I say it's huge. The coverage of the case study with its 5 variances and say 4 sections is huge. So it's as though the pre-seen material really kind of explodes into 20, 25 maybe areas that you could be asked about. And that's why we would emphasize again that it's a bit of a fool's errand to try and question spot, to try and say this is in the pre-seen material and therefore I think this question is going to come up. And obviously you'll get a certain amount of spotting correct simply because you can see that nearly the whole syllabus is covered in the variance and the task, and you're bound to get a couple of them right, but you're going to get an awful lot of them wrong. And you may therefore have concentrated on the wrong areas. You may have, you may be disappointed when what you thought would come up doesn't come up. You may be slightly disorientated, and it's better not to think too much at all about that. Let's just have a look before we go on to see what typical pre-seen material would perhaps look like in this. So let's see if we can see. Here is the pre-seen material. This is from the August 2016. These Wise Choice hotels. So a little bit of introduction here. Tells you it was started by a brother and sister and so on. They've got 4 hotels that need a refurbishment and so on. They have restaurant facilities. Here's the ownership down here. And then it goes on a little bit about each of the hotels, pictures, size of the hotel, etc., etc. And then we have a bit from a local newspaper saying we're going to be extending the hotel portfolio, buying some more. We have an organisation chart showing you who's who. We have a little bit then about saying in more detail who these people are and exactly what their responsibilities are, and so on, down to the hotel managers and so on, and what they're going to be responsible for in here. Quite a lot of that. But in a way, not maybe an awful lot coming up in the on-scene material relating to these people's tasks. Some obviously, but you know it's slightly out of balance really. The amount of information that is given in the pre-scene does not necessarily form a good indication of what comes up in the on-scene. Then we have some information about the type of guests you have in the hotel, business to leisure, different mixes in there. And we're going to be coming up then with the accounting system, what the finance officer is responsible for. And then we have some financial statements here. Profit for the year seems to be doing kind of quite well and so on. Statement of financial positions, cash flows, etc., etc. Few notes, budget information for the following year, and so on. Budgeted revenues broken down between the room, the restaurant, and so on within that. And where else? Still financial information for each of these hotels here. Some assumptions about the budgets in here. More information about the revenue and profits and occupancy and so on. Within that, information about the employees and the employment policies, environmental concerns. Of course, hotels have a lot of laundry and so on, a lot of water is used, a lot of heating is used, and so on. And we have going on here guest reviews, because there may be some suggestions about quality maybe coming out, what people think about the quality of the hotels. Type of guests, industry information, the hotel market, there's something about your competitors in here, a bit about the tax regime in the country involved. Very, very comprehensive indeed. 25 pages in this, and it's important. This is available to you in the exam. You can access this information in the exam, but obviously the amount of information in there, it can be quite difficult for you to find again or to pinpoint a bit of information you want unless you have become thoroughly familiar with what's actually there. Here's what the exam will actually look like here. So here, this is variant 2, I think I've got up here. It says, here's the section numbers. 1, let me just make it a little bit bigger. Here we are. Section 1, 2, 3, 4, number of tasks. These are 45 minutes each. And then we get on to, maybe need to make it just a little bit smaller. Here we get on to task 1. We have an email here coming to us. And it says here, please can you send me an email in which you explain for each activity in the consultant's activity table and so on. And there'll be a little bit more information below that here from the consultant. So we have the task or the question set out here with a little bit of additional information here which will be very, very relevant to that task. And there may or may not be information which is very relevant to answering this question in the on-scene material. The assumption should be that there will be relevant material in the on-scene portion of the case study, but it turns out not always to be really the case. And here's where you'll be typing it. This is a little kind of word processing screen you have in here. You'll be typing away. You get your 45 minutes for that. And then you get on to here, it says the next day, Rev Patel called you into the office. There's another task here. Please send me an email to both matters as soon as you can. And then you type it in there. And then we have a week later you arrive and so on. Some more tasks in here. Briefing paper, accounting for costs. These are the IT costs that they want to be accounting for. And then the final one here, final requirement here, final section in here. A few weeks later, we have the following email coming in here. And what it wants here is, for example, changeover methods that might be used and potential benefits and so on for the new IT system. So as I say, really quite a radical potential departures from what you might expect to be coming up. Therefore, if you can't question spot, if it's difficult even to predict the vague area perhaps in which questions might come up, other than saying, well, they're going to be within the syllabus, what should you do with the Preseen material? And our advice is to become thoroughly familiar with it, to get to know this company as though you'd kind of worked there for 6 months, to know who the people are, to know the nature of the business, to have a feel for the size of the company, its turnover, its profit, the value of the assets and so on there, to have a feel for the particular problems, to have a feel for how they earn their profits, are profits increasing, decreasing, and so on. Have there been any personnel problems? Are there any specific problems which have been suggested in the on-scene material? So become very familiar with what's there. Do not attempt to question spot. I would say do not even attempt to topic spot, because you'll end up spotting the syllabus. Be prepared to refer to information in the on-scene material in the exam. And what's very important is, where appropriate, to relate your answer to the scenario. So here we have a scenario dealing with hotels, and hotels have, specific problems. They may find that they have a very slack periods at weekends if they're a business type hotel. They may find that their laundry costs are exceptionally high. They may find that a recession has come in and that the holiday trade is in some way deeply affected, and so on. What in general they do not want in your answer is for you to write a very theoretical answer, which could be written for a hotel, an aircraft manufacturer, a newspaper, a television company, a restaurant, a supermarket chain, and so on. They want it related to the scenario and the nature of the business which is there. So, we suggest, therefore, that to become familiar with the material, you almost set up a little quiz for yourself when you're studying this material. Write down, what is the nature of the business? Have a question, nature of the business, answer. Then say ownership, answer. When was the business formed? Answer, etc. What's the main sources of revenue and activity? Answer. Roughly what's the size of the turnover, the profit, the gearing? What sort of employees are there? What are the competitors like, and so on? And you might end up with maybe 30 little kind of questions relating to the scenario and 30 little answers. Do them on a card, perhaps, back of a bit of paper and so on there. And then you can practice. You can say, right, draw a card out at random and say, who's the owners? Is it a public company? Is it a private company? Is it a family company, as this was, and so on here? Who is the chief executive officer? Who is the finance director? Roughly what is their turnover? So you begin to immerse yourself in the organization. CIMA says that when you're answering the questions, you must relate your answer to the information provided, either in a schedule that you've been given or in the body of the text. Certainly you have to relate it to the additional material which is provided for you, but you must also try to relate it to the on-scene material. You have to apply technical knowledge to the scenario. No theoretical answers here. You must fully address the task in hand. So if you're asked to explain about activity-based costing, explain about it. If you're asked to explain the advantages and disadvantages of activity-based costing, explain about that. If you're asked to explain what's meant by a cost pool or an activity driver, then you must explain that. So be very, very precise and focused in what you're doing. Do not include unnecessary introductions or scene setting. Okay, these are internal documents essentially. Your boss has asked you to explain about activity-based costing. It doesn't need a great preamble about what that is. It doesn't need over politeness, if you like. It's just an email, and it has to be kind of to the point. You're wasting your time if you embellish your answers with too much introduction, too much scene setting that is not required, and you're completely wasting your time if you don't apply techniques to the information which has been given in the question. Another useful piece of preparation you can do is to look at old CIMA case studies. Actually, I wouldn't look at more than one, but you can download the case study, the Preseen material. You can download the tasks which are required, and you can download model answers. So this will allow you to become familiar with the kind of shape of the case study, again, you'll see the types of question which go kind of shooting out from the on-scene material. And you'll also be able to have a look at the CIMA model answers to see the sort of depth which they would hope to find in an answer which is going to be a successful one in the case study. So these are all available on the CIMA website. So to conclude, when you get the on-scene material, work on becoming thoroughly familiar with what's there, really immerse yourself in the organization you're dealing with. Don't try to question spot. Be prepared for anything in any of the 3 syllabuses to come up, and work hard at trying to relate what's in the information to the question, or relating the question to what's in the information, so that you're not answering a question in theory, you're answering the question, you're responding as an employee of the organization, and you're giving information which is relevant to that organization.